There are a lot of big-time playmakers in the 2024 NFL draft class, but there's one guy who in my opinion is really going under the radar. He's done nothing but produce his entire life, has been one of the top receivers in college football over the last few years, and has shown that he can pretty much do everything when it comes to translating to the next level. His name is Troy Franklin. He's been Bo Nix's go-to receiver the last 2 years, and Franklin has been a big deal since the moment he stepped on a football field. He's currently projected as a late first-round pick, and Franklin could be a guy who's a complete steal and one of the best kept secrets in this year's draft class. He will be a secret no more though, as in today's video we're going to talk about who he is. We're going to go through his supersonic rise, talk about how he became a low-key prodigy receiver, his time at Oregon, and why the NFL has been calling his name. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the rise of Troy Franklin. In order to understand how Franklin got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He was born in Palo Alto, California in 2003, and came from a mother who was extremely hardworking and passed it on to her son. She was apparently working towards getting 3 college degrees, and this was obviously passed down to Troy. Despite doing all that and working, she would still make time to go to his middle school football practices, and I'm sure that had a huge impact on Troy. Franklin started playing organized football when he was just 5 years old, and he played both quarterback, running back, and anywhere on defense. Basically, he was the best athlete on the field, and everyone knew it really early on. He played all over the place in his youth leagues, but his favorite position was always wide receiver. He said, quote, "I like scoring touchdowns. I always have, and I like catching and running with the ball." As I said earlier, her work ethic definitely fell onto Troy, as before he even got to high school, scouts knew exactly who he was. At the age of 14, he ended up playing for Menlo Atherton High School and was definitely a big deal. His coaches knew from his first practice that he was going to be a special talent, and they quickly got him into the offense. His head coach said, quote, "It was obvious from the get-go that he was a special talent. Besides his great frame and being so long, he can really run. Plus, he knows how to attack the football. He also has strong hands, and his upside is boundless." Franklin would show upside his freshman year, as he would start on varsity, catching 34 passes for 585 yards and 7 touchdowns. He followed up his freshman season with an even better sophomore campaign, catching 25 passes for 531 yards and 12 scores. Teams could not figure out a way to stop him. He also ran for nearly 300 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. As a junior in 2019, he would take the next step, and now big-time programs were all over him. Before his junior campaign started, he had offers from Bama, Tennessee, and Texas. But since he was from California, he mostly attracted attention from the Pac-12, earning scholarship offers from the entire conference. Oregon really wanted him, and during the process he said, quote, "I just pretty much try to handle it the best way I can. The recruiting process is really hard. It's pretty much just talking to coaches, building relationships, and being real with yourself. If you really don't want to go to that college, you really need to let the coach know." During his junior season, he ended up catching 43 passes for 674 yards and 9 scores, and scored 8 of those touchdowns during a 5-game postseason run in which he led his high school to their first ever state title. By this point, he was considered the 3rd best recruit in California, but he would never get that chance. Because of everything going on in the world in 2020, he never got his senior year. It did not hinder Troy's recruiting profile at all though, as he finished with a total of 102 catches for 1,700 yards and 34 touchdowns. Despite not playing any football in 2020, he was selected to the Army All-American Bowl and eventually whittled his offer list down to Oregon and Bama. Ultimately, he would decide to sign with Mario Cristobal, and he would become an Oregon Duck. At the time, he said, quote, "I like what they're doing with the program, and I think it's on the verge of a national championship." For Oregon, they had been looking for a number 1 receiver for their 2021 class for quite some time, but had struggled to get the majority of their targets. Before they landed Franklin, they had just whiffed on Xavier Worthy, who ended up at Texas. In terms of his recruitment, Troy would finish as a 4-star recruit, the 2nd best player in the state of California, the 3rd best wide receiver, and the 54th best player in the class of 2021. He became the 2nd highest wide receiver to ever commit to Oregon, just behind Cameron Colvin, who signed in 2004. Troy would graduate early from high school and would enroll at Oregon in 2021. So how would he end up doing in Eugene? Let's take a look. By the time Troy arrived on campus, he was already making an impact. During his freshman year in 2021, he'd end up having Anthony Brown as a starting quarterback. He ended up playing in all 14 games, but was held out in their first matchup against Fresno State due to an injury. He'd make his first career start against Ohio State, and that was a major upset. In total for his freshman year, Franklin would catch 18 passes for 209 yards and 2 touchdowns, one of which came in their Alamo Bowl game against Oklahoma. In 2022, Bo Nix would transfer in from Oregon, and this is when Franklin would start to take off. He ended up catching 61 passes for 891 yards and 9 touchdowns, and new head coach Dan Lanning was super impressed with him. Combining that with Bo Nix, his role in the offense would absolutely skyrocket, and many were talking about Franklin as a day one pick if he could have a big 2023 campaign. This past season, Oregon would bring back Nix and Franklin, and he had a considerable amount of hype. He ended up catching 81 passes for nearly 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns. This included an 8-catch, 154-yard effort in a loss to Washington, and his performances made him a second-team All-Pac-12 selection. He truly had an incredible year for Oregon, and he became just the 12th receiver to ever have 1,000 yards in a season. This was the first since Dylan Mitchell did in 2018, and Troy Franklin had accomplished what he set out to do. In a game against USC, he said, quote, "When I first got out of high school, I kind of came here to change the receiver perception here at Oregon. So I'm kind of thinking I'm doing that right now." He was definitely a record-breaking type player at Oregon, as he finished near the top for almost every career record at Oregon, which included yards, touchdowns, and receptions. He also set the record with 25 touchdown receptions ever, and became a second-team All-American. Following this past year, Franklin decided he would declare for the 2024 NFL Draft. Shocker. So far, this year's class is stacked with receiver talent, as guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze are projected to go in the top 10, and then guys like A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, and Keon Coleman are also supposed to go pretty high. While I think Harrison, Nabers, and Rome should definitely be the top 3 guys, I think Franklin really could work his way into that top 5. Personally, I really like Keon Coleman at 4, but I think Franklin is really going to translate to the NFL. He's already made pre-draft visits with teams like Kansas City and Cleveland, but the consensus is that he'll be a late first-round pick. You also can't forget a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., but Franklin has incredible measurables. He's 6'3", has great speed with a 4.41 40-yard dash time, and he's also just 21 years old. He also had incredible stats, does not drop the ball, is a great route runner, and can kind of do a little bit of everything. As I said, the consensus is that he'll go in the first round or the early second, but he's also one of those guys I could see getting taken higher up. I think as teams interview and look at his film more and more, they'll fall in love with the idea of trying to make him a future wide receiver 1. The one thing that some scouts are somewhat worried about is that maybe he does lack elite athleticism, but there's not really anything that he can't really do in my eyes. As I said, he has great size, has ridiculous production, got better each and every year, has great hands, is a great route runner, and is definitely fast enough to make it at the next level. Troy Franklin has literally been dominating since he was a little kid. He was the best player on the Little League team, put up huge numbers in high school, won state championships, helped revitalize the receiver position at Oregon, became an All-American, rewrote the record books, and now will likely do the same thing in the NFL. But what do you guys think? If you're an Oregon fan, what do you think of Troy Franklin? How do you think he'll do in the NFL? And what prospect should I cover in my next video? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you're going to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.